finally returned to regular programming once again. Thank you for all the support on the marathon videos. Really appreciate it. I really wanted to put out videos during those 3 weeks, but a kid named High School Final Exams kind of got away with that. So I need to put something out while I was testing those during that time. And so I figured those marathons would be a good segue into what I like to call phase 2 of my content, if you will. A lot of new stuff's on the way. New series, some slight updates to other series as well. And we're going to be starting out phase 2, sort of, with the Porterverse Workbench installments, focusing on the one and only Molly. And so here we go. After years of anticipation, dreaming, and waiting, Molly the Yellow Engine has finally arrived in my collection. You're probably wondering why. Why make Molly, who was in one episode as a lead and appeared in a few episodes as a background character, and basically never seen again after a season or two? Well, to put it simply, she was a favorite of mine during my childhood. For some reason, I remember loving this character as a kid. I even owned the Trackmaster Molly when I was little, played with that thing all the time. Yellow was also my favorite color at the time. I was like 5 or 6 at the time. And thus I naturally just gravitated towards Molly. And I also remember that Whistle Memory game on the old Thomas website, and Molly was amongst the big 3 at Thomas, Percy, and James. She was even also in a bunch of the Bath Toys packs that were grouped in with the mains as well. Molly was there too, and a bunch of others. It's kind of leads to believe that Molly was pretty hyped to be a potential new lead character for Thomas. Not only did she stand out visually, there was also a lot of potential there for a character. And also gender balance, that was starting to become a thing, but yeah, anyway. So yeah, I don't know why they never made her a lead. A lot of potential. And so that's why I incorporated Molly into the Porterverse, which is my personal headcanon. Speaking of which, let's get into Molly's backstory in the Porterverse. Molly was built in 1913 at Stratford Works like the rest of her class, and she was an extra member of the class built. And she was built as a special order placed by the newly formed Nafford, Aldersborough, and Ulster Railway the year before. After construction was completed, Molly was shipped over to Sodor, and she became the first ever express engine on the KNUR and the first express engine on the east coast of Sodor. Molly was also painted into a very unique livery as well, this being a bright yellow with white wheels at that time. Very, very flashy indeed. And she was eventually given black wheels when she was sent over for an overhaul in 1933. This was when she was rebuilt into a D16. And over time, Molly gradually became a secondary express engine whenever Gordon was out of action. She also did a lot of freight service at her time as well. And Molly was the very first engine to request a repaint, as she pretty much hated her British Railways livery. And thus Molly was repainted back into her iconic yellow livery, as that is depicted on the model. In present day, Molly is preserved as the last D16 around, handling a mixture of passenger and freight services for the Northwestern Railway. Molly was one of the very first engines on my build list when I first started modeling back in 2021. I knew pretty much right away that a D16 would be the base model for this. After winning the bid, I waited a couple weeks for the model to arrive, and the day finally came. Now it's time to paint her up into her iconic yellow livery. But yeah, usually the gray primer would take about 2 coats being brushed on, so after all that drying, I went nuts with the yellow paint. The color is quite simply apple barrel yellow. Straight up yellow. After the yellow was fully applied and dried, I did a lot of touch-up work in black acrylic. After all that was the lining. I used a red paint pan and very carefully went on the indented lining on the boiler, cab, and tender. After all that lining, I made out the front of the swim box door in silver Sharpie, and also blacked out the number board as it had a British Railways number on it. A white paint pen was used for these weird top things in a tender, and it was left on Molly's TV series model, so I just carried it over. After all the painting was done, I gave the model a matte clear coat. And the final step was to paint the side rods red, with the red paint pen. And then of course give her my signature staple sort of elements, the tuck style megaphone. And just like that, Molly was done. This will be the part of the video where I showed the model running around and stuff. But you know what sucks? Apparently, so the model worked before I painted it. But when I tested it afterwards, when I was done, it didn't work. After investigating, I found that one of the wires in the pickups had come loose. You can probably hear the immense pain in my voice just saying that. Yeah, this was not fun to find out. But yeah, rest assured that one day I will get Molly running again. What that involves, I don't know. New chassis, bunch of wire surgery, who knows? I will, one more words, I will one day get this model Molly running again. Molly is one of my favorite engines in the Thomas universe. Not only for nostalgia reasons, but also her hidden potential within. I will be holding on this model for the rest of my days. And like many others in this collection, she's easily one of my favorites. Top 3, dare I say? Yeah, definitely top 3. Thank you all very much for watching this episode of Porterverse Workbench. And I will see you all in the next one. Back at it again with the Porterverse Workbench. This time we're going to welcome a new member to the Abandoned Squad, if you will. This is my abandoned Ttte Thomas Percy model. We shall first dive into the history of this dude in the Porterverse, and then into how I made this model. Here we go. So if you recall from previous installments, you'll remember that the Ttte Thomas events began to increase in frequency in the 1990s. And many railroads would either convert existing engines to look like Thomas characters, or build their own dummy units out of spare parts lying around. And these dummy units in particular varied in their accuracy to Thomas and all of us other friends, you know. One certain railway made several dummy units, including the smallest version of Thomas, Henry, Gordon, and Percy, among others. These were made using old chassis parts and flatbed bogies that were just lying around at the railway at the time. To their credit, they were actually pretty decent given their accuracy and circumstances. And the railway thrived for a brief bit as well. But eventually, bankruptcy would kill the railway that built these dummy units. By around 2002 or so, the units were either sold off, placed in sidings or abandoned, or just scrapped altogether. The dummy Thomas unit was never sold and was eventually abandoned in a siding and was completely covered in graffiti by around 2005. The Gordon and Henry units were sold to a theme park where they were motorized for hauling trains around the park. And the Percy dummy unit was sold to a train-themed restaurant that was set to open up in the outskirts of Pennsylvania near the Canadian border. The unit was repainted, albeit rather uninspired, as it was still very similar to Percy, and was placed inside the restaurant as a display piece. In around 2018, the restaurant eventually added an outdoor area, and thus the dummy unit was moved out to there. It was also around this time in 2018 when the real Thomas found it on tour. This is kind of where the whole story for this guy ends, as he's still at the restaurant today. Now that we have covered the backstory of this little guy, let's get into how I built the model itself. Like the dummy units of Thomas and Gordon, this dummy Percy was made using an all-engine scope push-along Percy. And this is the particular one that came with the Ghost Hunting 3-pack that also has the Ghost Train statue in the spinning radar. I took the Percy body apart and submerged the die-cast metal parts into 100% acetone. Always be careful with this sort of stuff as it is very, very strong. I've seen it about Legos, it is really weird to see. Anyway, so after letting it sit overnight in the acetone, I took a metal wire brush and used it to remove all the old paint. After getting it all cleaned up and rid of the old paint, I took white primer to the body, let that dry out for about a day, and then I went in with a coat of Rust-Oleum Gloss Metal Green. After letting that dry for another full day, I used a silver Sharpie for the title tank. I then added some blue dots to the sides to indicate like fake rivets. I imagine that the restaurant will paint those on. I then used metallic red for the cab window lining, and various other metallic details were added as well, like the gold cap for the funnel, little blue parts here and there, etc. In the face, I actually removed the nose using a hobby knife. Always be careful with knives, everybody. I then painted over the face with silver Sharpie. I probably should have used a rubber alcohol to remove the decaling, but I kind of ran out of time, so I want to get this video out soon. So you can still kind of see the face, but shh. After all the cosmetic body work was complete, I took the running board bit. I then mounted the whole body together onto a 6-wheeled bogey that I had lying around. The same type they used on the dummy Gordon. An ungodly amount of super glue later and balancing and checking to make sure it was all straight. The model was finally complete. I find this model rather simplistic actually, yet striking at the same time, you know? Not really sure, this is an admittedly simple mod to do really. But yeah, I feel like it just fits, you know? Not really sure how to describe it. But yeah, he's pretty cool. I mean, look at him. He's just a small boy. He is small, scrunkly little guy. Thank you all very much for watching this episode of the Porterverse Workbench, and I shall see you all in the next one. Welcome back to Porterverse Workbench. Here is the inspection car. And look at him, small, quite the goober, you'd say. Anyway, so let's just get into the whole video. The backstory of this scrunkly little character is fairly loose in the Porterverse. Basically, this model is meant to represent an inspection motor car similar to the likes of Winston built around the 1980s. Afterwards, this inspection car could be seen periodically going up and down Northwestern Railway's main lines and branch lines. It was eventually fitted with a grabber on the front to remove any debris in the way, as it had a very low ground clearance to the rails. I like to think in the early 2000s that the inspection car was given a name, which was Sandy. And this little goober known as Sandy can still be seen on Northwestern Railway today. Pretty cool. Now for the model work. The inspection car was made using an all-engine skill push-along Sandy. Like a few other models you've seen before, I took the whole body apart, sprayed every usable piece in primer, and then afterwards I applied Rust-Oleum Colonial Red to the main body. I then used silver Sharpie for the running board. I was going for a Santa Fe style look for this model, and I also used gold Sharpie for the window trim. I then got to work on the chassis. Like the Goobers, this is meant to be a free-rolling model. I used a bogey I had from an old flatbed just lying around. I almost used them on another model, but that's another story. I used a couple of Lego pieces to get the proper height for the model so that I can still roll freely without any interference from the body. I then super glued everything in place once everything was fitting just right. The cab roof was painted black and then cut down a little bit so I can fit into the model better. I then took the face and sanded off all the decals and sanded it relatively flat. I took silver Sharpie to the front of it, and then I used gold trim using gold Sharpie. I then went in with a black paint pen and just made the grill mark indications, you know. I then took the grabber, added a little bit of gold to the sides of it, and then glued it in place. And after spraying the model with the clear coat, boom! Sandy the inspection car was finally complete. Look at this little goober. So small. Well, yeah, more goobers. Gotta love them, eh? Thank you all very much for watching this episode of Porterverse Workbench. I shall see you all in the next one. Welcome everyone to the one and only Porterverse Workbench. And this is a surprising little model. Given all the teaser photos I was dropping earlier in the week, you're probably thinking it's going to be someone like Connor Kenji. But no! It is Speedster Toby.
You just got coconut mold.
So I guarantee how y'all are wondering, how in the flying fuck does this even work in the Porterverse? Considering that this doesn't look anything like Toby minus the paint scheme. Well, that's what this video is for. So before we go into all the model work and how I built it, let's go into the official backstory of this Speedster Toby dummy unit in the Porterverse. Here we go. During the glory days of Dale Thomas events, several railways across the world are trying to cash in on that iconic blue train marketability. And one such railway, which I've mentioned many times before, was trying to build as many dummy units as possible for random characters, mostly using random bits and pieces they had just lying around. And these dummy units included characters like Thomas, Percy, Henry, Gordon, and a few others as well. And it also included Toby. And Toby was planning to join an event as well. The original plan was to have a box van given fake side plates and was going to be like the dummy they push around because it was square. But about a week before the actual event was to take place, the box van suffered a horrible accident and it had to be scrapped. And so the railway panicked and got pretty desperate, and they sent out a bunch of representatives to try to find any sort of engine husks or parts they can salvage to build a replacement within a week. One such representative got very lucky as they found a theme park engine that was being sold. And so the representative quickly bought it and had it hauled off to the locomotive works at the railway. And so the theme park engine was given a new chassis to fit and was painted into the Toby colors with 7 on the sides. And the work was fully finished on the last day before the event. Thankfully, the event was reported to have done pretty well, despite almost everyone being confused as hell about Toby's design. When the railway went under in 2002, the Speedster Toby, as it was colloquially called, was never sold and was just placed in a barn that was owned by the representative that found it. And the barn happened to be close by to the railroad tracks. And so, in 2010, a certain Thomas on tour saw it when the door was open one day. It is said that the Speedster Toby is still in the barn today, just collecting dust. The model of this Speedster Toby has very interesting origins. You see, a while back I was in a Walmart just running errands for the family and everything, and I figured I might as well check by the toy aisle and see what little things I could possibly find for any model work. And I went to the toy aisle and there was they had a few push-along engines that were on clearance. And this one I bought Kana and Sandy, both of which I turned into models. It was $2 as well. It was a really good deal. Like all the other Goobers, I took the whole body apart and then painted each piece of the body in their respective colors. I then took the front of the face, cut off the nose and sanded it down to make sure all of the decals are off, and then I sharpened it over with silver. I like to think that the face was painted over to avoid any legality of having the engine exposed in the barn. Anyway, so once most of the cosmetic work was done, I then took a 6-wheel bogie from an old tender and slightly modified it to fit under the running board. After reassembling the model after the paint was all dry, I gave the whole thing a matte clear coat. This is very, very important. So after all that, the Goober Toby has been completed. The Goober army continues to grow. Thank you all very much for watching this episode of Porterverse Workbench, and I shall see you all in the next one. Hello everybody, welcome back to the Porterverse Workbench. This is a good one, I'd say. For we have a new member of the Goober army. Here is Goober James. Now, if being totally honest, this model was not planned at all, really. You see, I was out and about one day searching for a push-along Henry so I can make his Goober variant. Sadly, Henry was not in there. But they did have a James and a Young battle, which I did buy that day. And here we are now. So before we get into how to build the model, let's dive into the Porterverse backstory of Goober James. Here we go. Like most of the Goobers, it all begins with an unnamed railroad in the late 90s. Dale Thomas was in its prime, and this one unnamed railroad in particular was aiming to cash in on the brand. And so they thus built a lot of dummy units with their Thomas license. They even thrived with these for a little bit as well. They built a handful of engines, ranging from Thomas all the way to even Toby. But all didn't last good for that long, as Event Railroad was eventually shut down in 2002. And the units were thus sold off or just abandoned. The Gordon, Henry, and James units were sold to a theme park, while the other units went elsewhere. At this unnamed theme park in question, Gordon and Henry were motorized and became trains that just hauled excursions around the park. While James's unit in particular was turned into a beach display in a boat dark ride similar to It's a Small World at Disney parks. The theme park eventually closed around 2012, and by 2013 the James unit was removed from the park, and subsequently abandoned in a railroad storage site. And eventually Thomas, on one of his many US tours, will come across it around 2015. It is unclear if this unit survives today, but many say it has been presumed to be scrapped. The trail goes cold. Making this Goober James model was fairly easy to make, I'd say. Like all the other Goobers, he was made from an all-engine scope push-along toy that was heavily modified to fit onto this random chassis I had. After disassembly, I dunked the metal boiler into acetone overnight. I would then scrub it off the paint with a metal wire brush. After the paint was all removed, I then primed the body and the other parts in a white primer. And while the primer was drying, I worked on the chassis. This chassis you see in this model was actually once the chassis of my original Papa model. I completely gutted the entire model except for the wheels, and I then modified the toy running board to fit, making sure it fit just right, and then I painted it. I then painted the boiler red and made sure to keep the splashers and firebox clean from the red paint so that the secondary color will go on just fine. And the secondary color was a turquoise. I was going for a bit of a beach theme here as I was painting, and I wanted to keep the color palette very vibrant. The cab next was painted purple to match the other big engine Goobers. The running board was painted all yellow, and the bumpers were painted black. And after all of that cosmetic work, I glued the body down to the chassis. And then after the chassis was glued to the body, I gave the entire model a final matte clear coating. Just make sure the paint is sealed in and really unifies it all together. And just like that, Goober James was complete. And gotta say, he really fits in with the others. It's pretty cool. Goober Army is always growing. Speaking of the Goobers in general, there are going to be more Goober models. I'm actually currently working on Henry. I know I've been teasing out for a while now. I've finally managed to get my hands on one. It's taken way longer than I hoped for, but hey, we're here now. And also, a push-along Edward was also leaked pretty recently. Not sure when he will be released though, but rest assured that when I'm able to get my hands on him, I will add him to the ever-growing Goober Army. Thank you all very much for watching this episode of the Porterverse Workbench, and I shall see you all in the next one. After much anticipation, we are finally covering this long-standing model for the Porterverse Workbench. Here is my model of Caitlin. This model has been completed for over a full year now. The reason why I posted the showcase back was because I wanted to have Connor ready as well to showcase them all side by side. But alas, fighting a 464 tender engine for cheap has been proving rather difficult. So I said, fuck it, we ball, and just give her the showcase for herself. And Connor will have a separate video once I make him. So here we are with just Caitlin. You'll notice that this is very different from how Caitlin looks in the TV series, and you're more likely wondering why. Well, this is a good part to segue into that part of the video. Let's dive into Caitlin's Porterverse backstory in full. Caitlin is a 462 passenger engine built around the early 1920s. Which class? No one really knows. She just seems to fit with almost all of them. She often worked in the New England region of the United States, and often stopped by the Big City Railroad. Her career was rather mundane, aside from the occasional derailment once in a blue moon, and she was withdrawn in 1968. She was placed in storage by a new owner shortly after, and began to slowly rust away. A few years later, in 1971, a certain Sir Robert Norrenby II was looking to open his own railway on Sodor, and he was actively looking for engines from around the world. He would eventually come across Caitlin in an auction, and he made sure to win by leaps and bounds. Caitlin was now effectively preserved, but she was in a rather poor shape. and was shipped to Sodor, where she would be restored at Chromosgate Works under contract with the Northwestern Railway. This is where and when Caitlin would receive special custom semi-streamlining on her sides, as Sir Robert had a soft spot for this design type. Caitlin would also receive a new cardinal red livery with beige and silver accent and trim. She's also fitted with all the British railway regulations like buffers and such, and also the Ulfstead Castle Railway crest on her sides. Caitlin's restoration will be fully complete by 1973, and she was present for the Ulfstead Castle Railway's grand opening in 1974. In 2024, Caitlin is a common sight on the Ulfstead Castle Railway and all Vault's excursion trains around the heritage site, and she still works there to this very day. Caitlin, as a model, was easily the biggest mod in the entire collection, as when looking at this model, you can tell just how much was added on. Caitlin's model was made from a generic 462 model that I was found on eBay for cheap. I forget the brand, but I imagine it's pretty common. I first started work on the tender. The tender was all cosmetic modifications, so it was pretty straightforward. It was just primer followed by a custom red mix based on Caitlin's TVS color, but it was more red. I never really liked how pink the color was in the show, so I aimed for something a little bit more red for my model. Next, I modified the smoke box door. I took it off the model and I chopped off the center headlight, and using a bit of tape on the back, and also used super glue to fill in the hole. I know it sounds very archaic and sketchy, but hey, it works. I also made sure to sand down the front to make sure it was smooth. And now came the hardest part of the whole model, the semi-streamlining. I used an index card and a bunch of reference photos and very tedious measurements to ensure that the pieces fit nicely, and also they match each other too. Once I made sure all the pieces were just about right, I glued them down into place. After that was all done and dusted, I went to the buffers. These are just simply glued on after being painted, and these buffers are designed by the LBC Thomas. After the bodywork was done, I painted the engine itself in the same red color as the tender. A cleanup with black paint followed the red. And then came the beige and silver striping. This was the most difficult part of the entire modeling process, as I had to make absolutely sure that the line would match up with the cab and the tender. Not to mention the other side of the model as well. It was very tedious, but I managed to get it done. After the beige stripe was done, I went over the edges with a silver Sharpie. After some quick touch-ups here and there, the stripe was done. After all those tedious parts were complete, the model became much easier to finish. After that were the railway crests, which are pretty simplistic. Then came accenting some parts of the model with red, silver, gold, bronze, etc. Once all of that was done, I sprayed the whole model in a matte clear coat. And just like that, Caitlin was done. I'm actually surprised at how well the model turned out given my sketchy ass modeling skills from 2022. Her model has held up pretty well over the years, so I suppose I should give some brief bench updates. Arthur is 99% done. All he needs is his megaphone and he'll be done. James is about 95% done. He also needs a megaphone, but he also needs a smoke box door as well. This has to be 3D printed. Donald is currently being worked on, and Sigrid is on the way, and I will start working on her the moment she arrives. So yeah. Thank you all very much for watching this episode of the Porterverse Workbench, and I shall see you all same time next week. It's another episode of Porterverse Workbench. So in this episode, a rarity is happening. We're going to be actually covering an official character. Here is my new model of Daisy, the diesel railcar. Now, Daisy is a character that I've always liked. I've always found her design pretty inspiring and characterization over the years been pretty brilliant. Some of her episodes are super entertaining. And someone knew from the start that Daisy was going to be a must-do for the collection. So in Railway Series canon, Daisy is a British Railways Class 101. Like a lot of things in the Porterverse, things are going to be a little different. In the Porterverse, Daisy is a British Railways Class 121 bubble car built in 1960. So Daisy's Porterverse backstory is essentially almost the exact same as the Railway Series, just different basis. process of making Daisy's model was honestly really easy. Simply, Daisy is a Hornby 121 bubble car repainted into the iconic colors. Fun fact, the variant I purchased was the Coca-Cola livery. Patents had a deal at the time and had them pretty cheap, so I just picked one up. I took the whole body apart, window paint and all, and then I primed the body in a gray acrylic. After the primer was applied, came the green paint. In universe, the livery is known as Emerald Jade, but the actual paint I use in the real world is known as Holly Branch by Apple Barrel. After a few coats of this green paint, I then painted the roof. The roof was already gray, but it was a fairly dark gray and it didn't really match the green at all really. It felt off to me. So I just painted into a lighter gray, which I feel like it matches a lot better in my opinion. After the roof came all the finer details with the gold, like the gold stripe on the top, on the roof, etc. I was planning on adding a stripe on the side like a pinstripe like in Daisy's official livery, but I knew that'd be really hard to accomplish and I just kind of like this simpler look, you know? After like the bodywork was all done, I went to the chassis and I used a red paint pen to make the running board red, and also a silver stripe for the buffers. I feel like silver buffers are almost a must for an 80 and Daisy model. It brings the whole model together, given that she's pretty like stuck up, fancy kind of character, you know? After a quick clear coat to the body and a reassembly process, Daisy was basically complete. It's pretty cool. I like this model a lot. Well, yeah. And I'm happy to announce that I have some new characters as well in the works as well. Pip and Emma, yep, you heard that right, Pip and Emma, are coming to the Porterverse Workbench. And I can't wait to show you guys what they look like. As of recording, they should have arrived by the time this video goes up. So stay tuned for that in the distant future. Thank you all very, very, very much for watching this episode of Porterverse Workbench. And like always, I will see you all in the next one. Hello, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of the Porterverse Workbench. In this episode, we will be doing things a little bit differently, as in this episode, we'll be covering 2 characters in one instance. And these characters are also exclusive to the Railway series. Here are my models of Pip and Emma. Pip and Emma were created by Christopher Audrey in 1987, and they are based on the Inner City 125 class. And these 2 characters will appear frequently in the Railway series, usually delivering an important visitor from the mainland, and they will be purchased by the Northwestern Railway in 2011, and officially replaced Gordon as the primary express engines. This is a backstory that I actually really like. It's pretty neat, and the basis is also perfect in my opinion. So before we go into how I built the models, let's dive into the Porterverse backstory of Pip and Emma, the high-speed engines. In 1975, Pip and Emma will emerge from the works as some of the first inner city 125s ever built. They will be seen working in various regions across the UK under British Railways ownership. They will first travel to Sodor in 1987. From then on, they will make semi-frequent visits to the island and befriend some of the engines that live there. Eventually, in 2011, following their withdrawals from service, the Northwestern Railway will purchase them for express services. This will also be when Gordon was retired from the Express after a nearly 90-year-long career. What a champ. And with their new lives ahead of them, Pip and Emma will be repainted. The British Railways blue livery that they wore for most of their careers was replaced with the more vibrant yet similar Northwestern Railway blue. The yellow of course remained, and at the back instead of a white two-tone livery, the livery will be replaced with a brown shade to match the Northwestern Railway Express coaches. Although Pip and Emma's coaches in particular will keep their inner city characteristics. Pip was numbered D4 and Emma was numbered D5. In the present day, Pip and Emma can be seen running the Northwestern Railway's express services across Sodor and beyond. This is what they are most proud of. If I'm being totally honest here, Pip and Emma are probably the easiest models to make out of my entire collection. They are just simply a Hornby Inner City 125 set repainted into new colors. I took the bodies apart, masked out the parts of the body that I wanted to stay in their original colors, which was the yellow parts in this case, and then I applied a gray acrylic. Following the primer, I then put on a blue acrylic. This is the same blue I used for Thomas and Gordon. This is meant to be the NWR blue in the Porterverse. I made sure to leave the back half of the coaches for the other colors, trying to match the line of the masking tape. After about 3 coats or so of blue to make sure it was even, I then applied the brown tone. The exact shade being Apple Barrel's chestnut color. This is meant to be a connecting livery with the coaches, to make it match. Then came a gray shade for the roofing, to make it a nice vibrant color, and then silver sharpie for the handrails. Next, I wrote the lettering, D4 for Pip, and D5 for Emma. The tools I would use would just be simply toothpicks and white paint. After making the rough outlines with the white, I would then use a different toothpick with blue paint to adjust it after it was dry, to make sure it was nice and neat and legible. After doing back and forth between the blue and white paint to make sure it was just perfect, I would then apply a matte clear coat to the body, just to protect it from any damage over time and also unify all the paint. And then of course reassemble the body and boom, it was done. All the progress photos are mostly of Pip and the coach, but just take that process and rinse and repeat for the coach and Emma. Speaking of the coach was arguably the easiest out of the whole bunch. I simply just took the body apart and painted everything in the colors. I was going to add a yellow pinstripe, kind of like the Railway Series coaches, but I figured that'd be really hard to do and I feel like it will clash with the plastic window glass panes that I have in there. And so I just added number 1s to the sides to indicate they are first class coaches. This I feel like it separates the rest of the coaches from Pip and Emma's coaches, makes it a little more neat, you know? And this is the only coach in the set currently, but I do want to add more in the distant future. I saw a clean 4 to 6 coaches would be perfect, but that'll be in the very far future. It's not really a priority right now. But yeah, just like that, after all of that process, over and over again, Pip and Emma were officially complete. I am really proud of how these guys turned out. They look so right to me. I feel they fit just right. It's also kind of a rare case. I don't think I've ever seen Pip and Emma being made by someone else before. I mean, some probably has by this point, but you never know. Oh, and so you models out there, yes, you can use this livery if you want to. I'm not gonna be anal about it or be an asshole about it or anything. You can use this livery if you want to for your Pip and Emma models. It is perfectly fine. And if you're wondering where the D4 and D5 came from, they came from my good friend Chaotic Caroline. Subscribe to her, she's a good YouTuber. Oh yeah, before you leave, I also want to reveal a new shed facade I built. Pretty cool. I was also able to add an extra track so I can fit more models on it as well, as it was getting a little crowded now that Pip and Emma are joining. So yeah, I may need a shelf eventually. Thank you all very much for watching, and I shall see you all in the next one. Welcome back everybody to a brand new episode of the Porterverse Workbench. Today, we are going to be covering a character that I've been teasing for quite some time now. Here is Arthur. Arthur is a character that has Porter in a sense. I've talked about him in his video. Basically, in the sense that Arthur is a character that first appeared in a fairly solid season of the TV series, popped up here and there afterwards, got a little beefing up later down the line, and then was eventually never seen again following a major transitional period for the show, whether it be CGI or the full-on reboot. Now it's basically up to us fans to keep the legend alive. You may notice when looking at this model of Arthur that he is a bit different from most interpretations of him. I should dive into that now. So let's dive into the Porterverse backstory of Arthur. Here we go. Arthur is one of the 130 LMS-2MT tank engines built. Which one exactly? No one really knows. However, it is believed that he was built after nationalization and wore BR black for most of his service life. Arthur was withdrawn from service in the late 60s. And around the same time as Arthur's withdrawal from service, the northwestern region of British Railways was in the middle of separating from British Railways entirely, and a deal was being worked out where a handful of various engines of British Railways would be transferred over to the reborn Northwestern Railway. Arthur was actually chosen by Sir Tom himself, and was the first of these engines to arrive in 1968. Shortly after arriving, Arthur requested a repaint. He had grown rather sick and tired of wearing the boring British Railways black, and wanted to honor his LMS roots, as he was an LMS design. The condition was that the lettering of it would be that of his new home, the Northwestern Railway. This would become the precedent for all engines with lettering on the Northwestern Railway. Arthur would enter service on the Northwestern Railway in January of 1969. wearing LMS maroon with Northwestern Railway lettering, and he was assigned to the freshly built Harwick branch line. Arthur would run the line solo until Ryan joined him in the late 70s. Today, Arthur still runs the Harwick branch line with Ryan and absolutely loves his life on Sodor, and he wouldn't have it any other way. Arthur's model was very easy to make, as just an old Bachmann 2MT from Hatton's repainted. Rest in peace, Hatton's. After the model arrived, I took the body shell off the chassis and prepared it for painting. I primed the body in a gray acrylic. After the primer dried for a full day, I went in with Apple Barrel Barn Red for the base color. I found that this color actually better resembles LMS Maroon, and I didn't want to do just bright red or anything, as it looked too similar to James. I brushed on each coat of paint by hand. Usually I do around 3, maybe 4 coats if needed, but usually 3 is perfect. After another full day of drying, the next step was the lining. Traditional LMS Maroon livery has a two-tone red and black that's separated by yellow lining. I took some inspiration from the Unlucky Tugs model of Arthur and mimicked the lining from there. Except the process was a little bit different. Instead of starting with the black, I actually started with the yellow. I made a fairly generous liner across the tanks, and after that dried, I did some touches with the red, and then I very carefully afterwards went on with the black, as the dark colors tend to cover up better. It was a very, very tedious process. I had to do this for pretty much almost every side of the tanks, cab, bunker, etc. And this all achieved the two-tone look. After the very tedious and nerve-wracking process that was that whole lining deal, I did the lettering. Believe it or not, I actually hand-painted the lining myself. How I achieved the lettering like this? Well, it's very simple. I used masking tape and actually the rivets that were molded onto the body as a guide to make sure the tape was straight. And I used that and made just a little strip gap for me to paint. And then I carefully wrought out the letters with toothpicks for each letter. And after they dried, I very slowly and carefully peeled off the masking tape, and did a few touches here and there with a toothpick and the red paint again, thus achieving the neat NWR on the sides. This was also repeated for the other side of the model. After the whole ordeal with the lettering and lining, came various details with metallic sharpies, and a little bit of paint here and there. And after I glued on the megaphone into the window, I gave the model a matte clear coat. And after that whole massive process, Arthur was finally done. I am really proud of how he turned out. He just fits so well to the collection, you know? I'm also really proud of how the color turned out as well. I was surprised at how well the Apple Barrel Barn Red resembles LMS Maroon. I also would like to take this time to say thank you for the crazy response on the livery special. Thank you all for watching this episode of the Porterverse Workbench, and I shall see you all same time next week. Welcome back to the Porterverse Workbench. Today we'll be doing something a little different, as we'll be covering a non-engine character for the very first time in the series. Here is my model of Bruno. For all you casual fans of Thomas out there probably wondering, who the fuck is Bruno? Well, Bruno is a character from the All Engines Go reboot, and he's actually my favorite character from the entire reboot as well. I just find him super relatable at times, and he's all around pretty chill guy. So I just knew I had to add him to the collection, as he is, in my opinion, the saving grace of the atrocious reboot. You might notice, however, that Bruno in this model looks very different from his All Engines Go counterpart. As in All Engines Go, Bruno is a bogey caboose, and my model of him is that of a barber caboose. Probably wondering why. Well, I should get into that now. Let's dive into Bruno's backstory in the Porterverse. Without further ado, let's get into it. Bruno is a barber caboose built in the late 1910s. He worked on the Big City Railroad in his early years, and often saw Porter, Little Owl, and all those other guys on the railroad. He would see a significant scenery change in 1924 when he, along with other cabooses, were purchased by the Northwestern Railway to work on Sodor. These cabooses, along with Bruno, will become part of the new subsidiary for the Northwestern Railway, known as Kildane Transport. This was when Bruno was fitted with buffers and European-style couplings. These cabooses could be seen on nearly all trains going along the branch that ran from Kildane, the capital of Sodor, to the northern town of Peel-Godred. Bruno will operate on the line until 1966. This was when the cabooses were retired and most of them were scrapped. Bruno would be the only one not scrapped, however, as he was saved by Sir Toby himself. When the Northwestern Railway was reformed in 1968, Bruno was placed into service on the Northwestern Railway main line. And into the early 1970s, he would end up bouncing around the various branch lines on the island. This means he would often work with either Thomas, Sigrid, Duck, Toby, and all those guys in that general region of the island. And Bruno would be officially placed on the Arlesdale branch line in the 1990s, and work with Sigrid full-time. And this is where we can find Bruno in present day. Okay, I know I say this for nearly every model now, but Bruno was probably the easiest to make out of the whole collection. It actually might be the truest time I say this, as he's just an HO scale barber caboose. And these are very, very easy to come by, especially in the United States. And Bruno is just a very simple repaint. However, the version that I used had lettering on the sides. My original plan was just to simply sand off the lettering and leave the red shade as it was molten red plastic. But sanding proved to be a little difficult as I didn't want to fuck up the wood paneling finish on the sides. So I decided fuck it and opted to repaint the caboose fully. And so I primed the whole caboose body in a white primer. After that dried, I sprayed the body in Rust-Oleum Poppy Red. I originally bought this color to use for the Scarlowe Railway engines, as I'm planning to make them eventually in the distant future, as I already have Scarlowe. But you'll find this color in other models as well eventually. After that dried, I used toothpicks to make out the yellow window frames. There's also when I fitted buffers to the front and back of Bruno. These are HO scale Markland buffers that are designed by the LBC Thomas. After that was done, I painted the roof of Bruno in Apple Barrel's Timeless Gray. And after all those paint details were done, I sprayed the body in a matte clear coat to finish it off. And just like that, Bruno was done. I just really like how it turned out. It was just a really fun model to make. It came out so right, you know? Thank you all very much for watching this episode of the Porterverse Workbench. And I shall see you all same time next week.
And now, folks, it's time to say goodnight. We sincerely appreciate your patronage and hope we've succeeded in bringing you an enjoyable evening of entertainment. Please drive home carefully and come back again soon. Good night.